The psychology of people who stop explaining themselves. Have you noticed this strange moment in your life? When you stop explaining yourself. Not because you're angry, not because you don't care, but because something inside you quietly shuts off. You realize that no matter how clearly you explain, some people will still misunderstand you. Some will twist your words. Some already decided who you are. And in that moment, you don't argue. You don't defend. You don't over-explain. You just go silent. Here's the part most people miss. This isn't weakness. It's not giving up. And it's definitely not indifference. Psychology says this is a turning point. A dangerous one. Powerful one. Because people who stop explaining themselves have crossed a psychological line most never do. And once crossed, they don't come back the same. Let's talk about why this happens, what it does to the mind, and why it quietly changes how others see you, even when you say nothing at all. First, everyone explains themselves. You explain your intentions. You explain your tone. You explain your silence. You explain your mistakes. You explain who you really are. Because deep down, humans crave to be understood. Psychologists call this the need for validation. It's wired into us. When people understand us, we feel safe. When they don't, the brain treats it like rejection. So we talk. We clarify. We justify. We over-explain. But here's the truth nobody tells you. Over time, explaining becomes exhausting, especially when you notice a pattern. You explain, and the same people still doubt you, still question you, still judge you, not because they don't understand, but because understanding was never their goal. And that's when something shifts internally. The mind starts asking a dangerous question. Why am I explaining myself to people who already decided who I am? This question doesn't make you loud. It doesn't make you aggressive. It makes you quiet. Psychology calls this cognitive withdrawal. It happens when the brain realizes emotional effort isn't producing safety or connection anymore. So it protects itself. You stop correcting misunderstandings. You stop defending your character. You stop proving your intentions. Not out of ego, but out of clarity. Because you finally understand something painful. Some explanations are invitations to be controlled. The more you explain, the more power you give away. And once the brain sees that, it never unlearns it. People who stop explaining themselves are often misunderstood as cold. But emotionally, the opposite is true. They felt too much for too long. They tried. They cared. They gave context. They gave chances. Until one day, the emotional cost became higher than the emotional reward. This is when emotional maturity begins to look like detachment. You don't need people to agree with you. You don't need to correct every false assumption. You don't need to be seen as good by everyone. You realize something liberating. Your peace doesn't require their permission. And this realization is uncomfortable. Not for you, but for everyone else. Here's where it gets interesting. When you stop explaining yourself, people react. Not because they lost access to information, but because they lost access to you. Suddenly, they can't predict you. They can't push emotional buttons anymore. They can't provoke reactions the way they used to. Silence becomes unsettling. Psychology shows that humans fear what they can't read. And when you stop explaining, you become unreadable. Your silence forces others to sit with their assumptions. And most people hate that. So they project. They label. They guess. But you don't correct them. Because you've learned, explanations don't change minds. Boundaries do. There's a specific type of strength in this silence. It's not dominance. It's not manipulation. It's restraint. You know who you are. You know what you meant. And that's enough. Psychologists link this to internal validation. When self-worth no longer depends on external approval. This is rare. Most people are still explaining themselves. At work. In relationships. Online. In arguments they replay in their head at night. But the person who stops explaining has stepped out of that cycle. And once you stop playing defense, you stop losing energy. That's why this change feels so heavy at first. You're shedding a habit your nervous system relied on for years. But let's be honest. This phase isn't comfortable. Silence feels lonely before it feels peaceful. You'll notice people drifting, conversations becoming shorter, some relationships quietly fading, because some people were only connected to the version of you that explained, that softened, that reassured them. When you remove that version, the dynamic collapses, and this is where many people panic. They start explaining again, just to restore familiarity. But those who don't, those who stay silent, change permanently. Here's the psychological paradox. The less you explain yourself, the more weight your words carry. Because now, when you speak, it's intentional. You're no longer talking to be understood. You're talking because it matters. This creates a subtle authority. Not forced, not loud, but felt. People begin listening differently. They read your tone. They notice pauses. They analyze what you didn't say. Silence becomes communication. And that's why people who stop explaining themselves are often perceived as dangerous. Not because they are harmful, but because they are no longer controllable. This doesn't mean you stop communicating. It means you stop over-communicating. You choose clarity over justification, presence over performance, boundaries over approval. And this shift rewires how your brain handles conflict. Instead of reacting emotionally, you observe. Instead of defending, you decide. Instead of chasing understanding, you allow misunderstanding. Because you finally know, people committed to misunderstanding you will never be convinced by explanations anyway. So you save your voice for moments that deserve it. If you've stopped explaining yourself recently, you're not broken. You're not cold. You're not losing empathy. You're evolving. You're learning that your energy is finite. Your peace is valuable. And not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Silence isn't absence. It's presence without performance. And once you understand that, you stop explaining yourself. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally know who you don't need to say it to.